This is Deanna Wolf, and we are interviewing Jacob Moss, who is the legislative director at the state capitol. He is going to share with us how the legislature works and sometimes doesn't, how people can influence it, and how to stay involved when the work involves some drama and definitely some risk too. So, Jacob, you have been in and out of the legislature. You sometimes have worked as a lobbyist, sometimes as a clean energy advocate, even an electrician. What brought you back to the state capitol?
Well, it's good to see you again, Deanna. It's been a while. Um,
Yes.
yeah. Well, so I have had quite a meandering path. I think, what brought me back was, quite frankly, my wife told me I had to get out of the house or she was going to kill me. So I, I had a number of, I've had a number of different sort of professional endeavors and businesses I've started and things that I've tried, and I encountered some of the same hurdles that a lot of us did. Two crises ago, I lost the construction business, or at least it got real small. And then during COVID, I had another tech startup that was in the healthcare space that I had started, and then a few months later, COVID started, and I learned a lot from those things. I was unprepared for those types of all encompassing, devastating social upheavals, if you will, or financial economic upheavals.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not alone in that, but I think what I came away with from those is that we have a choice, I think, in government and in this country and in this state, that we can either create systems and institutions and structures that make it so the margin of error between bankruptcy and success isn't so small. I think we've created a situation where risk taking is really penalized, and it's really hard
Mm.
to experience the good luck more often than the bad luck to be successful. And so I just came back into policy because I feel like there's a lot that we can do as the government. And there's a lot of cynicism about it. And I know that's sort of a cliche to say, I'm with the government, I'm here to help, but I'm with the government and I'm here to help.
So, because of your experiences with risk, right,
Yeah.
and having things go sideways, do you think that your role is to make life more safe for citizens?
Um, I suppose safe is an interesting word. I think we should have a bigger safety net, and a one that isn't just about once you're on the edge of homelessness, or just some sort of devastation. Like, a safety net can be, we're creating a predictable environment where people who want to start businesses or change careers, or do certain things, can trust that the sort of underlying set of rules and are not going to change on a whim, right? I mean, one of the things we are suffering through right now with the polarization and all the inequities is that from moment to moment, especially with this current administration at the federal level, but really from for every 4 years, and with the parties being so polarized, it's like it's hard to do any sort of long-term planning, and that applies for you as an individual, and it applies to the biggest companies. So safe, I guess, predictable is probably the word I'd use more than safe. I mean, that's a kind of safety, but just the ability to make decisions, I think, is and trust that your government's not going to do something stupid and pull the rug
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's a really good example in the energy space right now where I think the new administration essentially canceled all solar permits across the federal solar permits across the
Yeah.
nation, and that wreaked havoc in the industry. You know, people who had made big investments already were kind of caught off guard by that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one example. I mean, just the IRA most more broadly was pulled out from under everyone, right? And the early cancellation of all the tax credits and all the other types of incentives and lending agreements and all that stuff that just got ripped away because of this idea that we should be a petro state, right? Like, let's bring back coal, which
Right.
is, I mean, even the people that like coal know that its days are numbered because it's just more expensive than everything else. So, so it's just stuff like that that it just creates chaos, and you can't stop the ocean, right? I mean, it's solar is the cheapest electron you can make anywhere on the planet right now. It's not even a close second, and so we're just silly to be trying to penalize it if we really care about affordability. So me, I could rant
Yeah.
on this and go on tangents forever, but yeah, your example is exactly right.
Right. Well, I had a conversation this morning with staff in DC, and they were explaining that in a state like Nevada, which has a lot of sun, solar is a great investment there. And the people who had all these permits had them ripped from them and then
Yep.
consolidated to the point where if they want to get their permit reissued, they have to go to a special department within the Interior Department and get something signed. So it's
Yep.
become, it's a gifting of a permit that was
You have
just
to kiss the
automatic
ring.
before. So that's
You
kind
have
of a
to
disaster.
you
So
have to kiss the ring. Yeah, that's right. It
yes,
is it is
that's
a
right. That
disaster.
that is not right. This is
Nope.
kind of
That
on
is
the side of what we were intending to talk about, but nevertheless,
no, but it's
never,
part of it. I mean, it's in line with
yeah,
the you want to talk about power dynamics and things like that. And that,
yeah,
this is a certain type of power that in this country, thankfully, it's always sort of been there, but it's been more fringe. It hasn't been like the core, way that our government functions with this like blatant corruption and just trying to filter everything through you so you can skim off the top, whether it be money or favors. But
right.
anyway,
No, that's exactly right. We don't want it to be that way, and it seems to be that way right now. And I
yeah,
mean, they also in this meeting I had, there was, the discussion of oil and gas were basically like given the golden key and, go forth, right? So meanwhile, solar, wind power, all of the renewable energy sources that are inexpensive were
yeah,
given
yeah,
having their permits taken away. So not great. So
not
okay,
great.
so circling back to basically the reason I wanted to talk to you, not just because you're a wonderful person and interesting to talk to, but if you're a citizen and you're wanting to participate and to make a difference, the question is how do you do that? And so
Mhm.
before we get into that, because that's pretty large, um, if you can just give us an idea of what a legislative director does and if a person's meeting with you, um, how they should be prepared. But first, just tell
Mhm.
us like what do you do?
What do I do?
Yeah.
So it's funny, this question, when I try to explain this to my wife or my family or friends, what I do, eyes quickly glaze over because a lot of what it is so subtle, and it doesn't really, explaining the job description doesn't do it justice. So I'll make my best effort here explaining what I do. Um, every district in the state has an office in Sacramento. There's 80 assembly members and there's 40 senators, and I work for one of the assembly members. So our district, each district in California, you take basically the population divided by 80. So we have roughly around 500,000 people. We have 3 cities in the district I currently represent, or my boss represents, and I work for. So each office you could think of as its own little small business within the larger sort of legislature. So I am the legislative director, and you could think of me, sort of the closest analogy in the private sector would be like the chief operating officer, meaning I sort of make sure that the trains run on time and we don't miss any deadlines, and all the boxes are checked as we go through the legislative process. So, when are committee hearing dates, when are letters due, when are all votes going to happen, all these sorts of things. That's one sort of core function that I do as the legislative director, and every office has a legislative director.
Yes.
And then the other thing that I do is really craft the the bill package, as it were. So anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30, depending on how ambitious the office is, bills are introduced, and making sure that all of those bills move along and that those bills are aligned with the members' priorities, and then understanding sort of what the pros and cons are, what the process might look like, what the pathway might look like for each of those bills, making sure the policy makes sense, being able to identify where those policies are iterative versus big changes, writing bill language, right? I mean, working with the
Right.
attorneys and making sure that the bill language is done in a way that is sorry about my phone there, is correct, relative to the standards, all that. I mean, I could go on and on, but I mean, at a high
Okay.
level, really what the legislative director does is make sure that legislation is happening and moving along. And then I also have some functions where I engage on budget and trailer
Okay.
bills and all that other stuff, but I could go down the rabbit hole.
Oh, okay, but
Yeah,
in
with that.
relation to bills, right?
Yeah.
You're managing the portfolio, you're making sure that the bills are aligned with what the assembly member wants.
Yep.
But if an advocate shows up and has a meeting with you,
Yeah.
um, say it's on solar or something like that, and
Yeah.
you know, are they, is it a lobbyist that you're meeting with? Are you meeting with industry groups? Do they come up with the ideas for the bills? Like, you know, where's it coming from? Where's the origin of a bill?
So I'm not being hyperbolic when I say the origin of the bill can be from anywhere. So it's anyone who has an idea. So it can
Okay.
come from lobbyists, it can come from constituents, it can come from a staff member who read an article, it can come from a bill that happened last year that we're going to try again. It comes from the member if they had a conversation at a conference with someone who talked them into something. It can come from, really, like, anywhere. If a constituent has an idea, it can come from that. Um,
Yeah.
but that's to talk about where a bill idea can come from. Now, getting that bill idea into something that the member agrees to do is a different story, right? So there's a whole kind of analysis that we do on a bill, because you could imagine how many bill ideas are floating around out there, and not all of them are good ideas. So we have to vet those ideas and filter, and we filter a lot of stuff. So at the beginning of every year, we might have 150, different ideas, 200 different ideas, and we need to cull that list to get it down to about 12 to 15 is where I like to be.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what goes into that, unfortunately, is not necessarily like, is this a great idea? Like, if this bill, wave a magic wand, this bill was the law of the land, it would be the greatest thing ever for everybody. Everybody would instantly be wealthy. The air would be clean, like, all, birds chirping, all that. Like, sure, that the chances of that bill making it through the legislature are about 0%, 0.1%. And so, we have to factor that in because we have very limited resources. So we have to be able to, choose our spots carefully, and we can only really take on two or three like monster tasks out of the entire bill package. So,
Right.
but yeah.
Okay, but that's a great statement, because if you're an advocate and you have an idea and you're making a sale to the legislative director and the congressperson or whoever it is that you're talking with in that office management
Hmm.
zone, right?
Yeah.
You need to be mindful that they have a limited amount of time,
Yeah.
and then they're going to go down a checklist and go, is this feasible? Is it supported? Is it, et cetera, et cetera. So if you could just quickly, I mean, you can take your time, but, give us the outline of, like, somebody comes in, they've got a great idea, you like it,
Yeah.
and you're going to go down your list and it's got to have
Yeah.
these elements. So what would
Yeah.
those elements be?
So, I mean, top line, is this something that my boss, and when I say my boss, I'm referring to the assembly member. I do have a chief of staff, but
Yeah.
that's the chief. So just so you know, so what does my boss care? right? That's the first step. Not every member cares about every issue or every bill in a way that they would want that to be something that they would advocate for. And some of that is just because they have personal preferences, and some of that is because you don't necessarily take an agriculture bill, to a member whose district is, urban Los Angeles, right? There's just certain types of things where there's regional, geographic, or just certain preferences. So that's the top line, is like, does the member care about it? And I think we're going to talk a little bit about your Unite the Parks, and that is a case where my member is, at the time, was representing Fresno, which is the city, but he had a cabin up in the Sierras, and so his cabin was in the footprint of the area you're trying to protect, and
Yeah.
he lost it in a fire. But he really, he cared a lot about that region, and so that was, I think, the number one reason why he was interested in pursuing, helping you.
Yeah.
The other, then you kind of go down the list. It's like, is this policy in line with the general sort of momentum that the state has been, engaged in, right? So every issue just about has some sort of department or agency that's been working on that issue over many years, and there have been a lot of policies and rule makings and a lot of decisions made to sort of achieve a general goal. And so, for the most part, if you're analyzing a bill, you want to know if that bill is maybe iterative, or improving on, or somehow, is it in line with the general momentum of things? And it doesn't mean that every bill has to be that, but if you're deciding that you want to try to do a bill that's going to take years of momentum and completely reverse it, like, every single department is an oil tanker, and you can't just flip an oil tanker on a dime. These things have a lot of momentum. And so you have to pick your spots and figure out how that fits into the larger sort of context. And then you want to know who's supporting and who's opposing. There are a lot of groups, a lot of lobbyists who have influence for various reasons. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well, I think. But, the who's going to oppose the bill matters. Who's going to support a bill matters. And or who's going to not care. That's a kind of support, right?
Yeah.
The lack of opposition is helpful, and it doesn't mean you don't do the idea, but it means you really need to start to dig into how much your opposition or your support is going to care about your idea. So very influential groups might have you as their, like, 15th ranked bill that they don't like, right? So does that matter as much as if it's their number one kill? No, it doesn't matter, but it's good to know. So, who cares about a bill? Who doesn't? Who's your natural coalition, right? What type of coalition? And then you start to get into other stuff, like, is this what type of bill is it? Is this something really wonky? Is this bill a statement? Is it going to get a lot of press? Is it going to get a lot of attention? Is it so there's a long list, and I could go on and on, but I think it it's good to do a lot of that analysis yourself, and the more you walk in with those answers, the better. I think some of the best advocates are not they don't shy away from sharing with staff all sides of a policy, right? So if a lobbyist or someone walks into my office and they say, this is the greatest thing ever, and you say, well, who opposes it? And they say, nobody. Everybody's going to love this bill. What are you even talking, right? Like, nobody, not everybody doesn't like anything. So,
Yeah.
it's much better to walk in and say, here's the idea, here's who supports, and then here's all the holes. Here's the problems, here's who hates it, here's what's happened and failed, here's what's happened and has been successful in the past. Like, here's the larger context, all of that stuff. Like, do your homework on it. I think, I've had many, many conversations with people on the phone who they call and they have an idea, and they want my boss to do the idea, and get really, really, really mad when we say, know, or when we start asking questions they don't have answers to. And I can understand the frustration in that. The other
Yeah.
thing with a bill is a lot of times people fall in love with the how of a bill, and I think it's important to show up with the why of a bill. And I know that sounds a little bit cliche, but there's a lot of experts and there's a lot of institutional knowledge, and so showing up with a concept or a why and a purpose invites people to participate in the solutioning. When you show up with with a how and with a very rigid sort of solution to a thing, you kind of push people out who might otherwise care about your idea, and you people kind of really fall in love with that how. And so I think just that flexibility and that open-mindedness and that willingness to sort of engage in a process that is creative and inclusive is something else that I think is we look at in a bill when it's presented to us.
Right. I think you're saying two things that they can match, but that's sometimes hard for them to match, right? Because you need to do all your homework when you have an idea, right? You know your reason for doing it. You
Yeah,
develop the how, right? This is how we're going to do this. But it can be you end up getting ownership in all the work that you put into that. And then when you
yeah,
walk in the door, it's a little bit harder to take feedback then, right? You're like,
yeah, because you did all
I've
the
already
work.
figured it out.
It's all done. You're
But
like, and I hate to break it to you, this is step zero. All the work you did got you to zero, and
yeah,
now it begins.
th- that's right. And I think it's important you have all of your homework done. You've got the honesty to talk about the people that are against your proposal because they're always there. Um, but I think it is a hard thing to be then open to, okay, like let's get some feedback on this, right?
It's
Um,
painful. It is hard to be
it
an
is
advocate.
it
It is
is
hard to be
painful,
an
but
advocate, and I'm preaching to the choir on that. I know it's hard because so much of it, once you hit the legislature, it's kind of out of your control in many, many ways, right? You're like, here's my baby,
oh,
run with it.
yes.
And you don't know which direction it's going or who's got
Yeah.
it or who's killing it or you don't know anything. And then eventually something might spit out the other end and they're like, here's your deal, take it or leave it. And you're like, that is nothing like where we started.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I had two experiences that, two drafts of a bill. In the first round, it was so different that essentially it was the end, right? It was
Yeah.
I rejected it because I'm like, this isn't going to fly when I go and talk to all of these hundreds of local people I've spoken to and said the bill's going to be like this, and the bill completely not that, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, so then I was able to, but it took me four more years to find a legislative advocate that was willing to do a bill that was more in line with what I had
Yeah.
been saying to people. So that's 4 years of time, and
Yeah.
it hurts when you end up spending an extra four years on something. But
4 years. Good
but
Lord.
to,
Yeah.
to to bring it back around to that, now though, I think you have to decide where your lines are. Like, I need these three things, these other three
That's
can
right.
I can give or take, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
That's
after you've
it.
done
That's
all
in my
this,
analysis. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Cut you off.
no, you go ahead. I
I
think
mean that's part of my analysis for a bill is what are the bottom lines, and it's helpful. I want to know what the bottom lines are, or the bright lines, or whatever words you want to use. But I want to know it from my boss. What does she care about on this policy, and what are the things that are non-negotiables for her, so that we know, when we're talking on her behalf, because we don't run every single thing by her. But what are those lines that can't be crossed? Where will she lose interest or give up or walk away or whatever it is with the bill? But then I also want to know that from the advocates, because if we have, especially if we have conflicting bright lines, then we know right out the gate we're in a conflict situation that will never work. But we want to know that. But the other thing you said about that I want to highlight as far as when I'm looking at considering bills. The other thing is the legislature should be your last resort. I think people underappreciate the impact of a law, right? And so we all have a sort of a skewed toward our own perception view of the world. And so we walk into the legislature and we're like, this is a great idea. Well, why would everybody not want to do this new mandate? Right. And I don't think we understand the scale of of humans. 40 million people in California, 300 million people in the United States, or whatever the number is now, 350. Right. I mean, and so we want to pass these laws, and there's so many ripples to passing a law. So not only do you lose control of your idea as an advocate when you walk in the door, but it's also way better to not have to use the legislature to get something done, because going through the legislature sucks. It just, and so, like, if you can do it through a department, if you can do it just out in the world, just on your own, just build consensus and coalition, right? I mean, it really, I can't emphasize enough that people that walk in, this group walked into us the other day, and I'm reluctant to give like super specific examples, but this was something that was going to take what probably is a problem and then create a mandate that would be painted across every single youth sports organization in the state. Everything from college, whatever the highest levels at college, to down to like the YMCA, like local rec. It was going to be this sort of this mandate, and these advocates were they were 1,000% sure they were right. They're like, this will prevent injury, right? But the fiscal and the social impact of a mandate on all of those groups is it's hard to even explain like how much money and time and all that it would take, but even if it may not even be enforceable. And so I just think that it's tricky because humans are humans, but there's a sense of righteousness that I see that is really a turnoff to staff, because we've seen all kinds of approaches and all kinds of ideas, and that sense that you are correct, and not open to feedback or input or flexibility is really a red flag that I don't even tend to look at even the policy merits beyond that general vibe when I sense that in an approach.
Yeah. Um, that's a that's quite a statement. It's really important for an advocate to understand that, right? Because when you're really involved in something, it's hard not to take ownership to the degree where you seem like you're inflexible.
Yeah.
And that, if you get that reputation, then people aren't going to want to talk to you, because they're going to hear that and say, okay, well, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
That's trouble,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which, all of these things I did not have any idea about. I didn't actually, the good news is that I didn't have a solid legislative proposal when I started. All I actually had was one sentence on a piece of paper that I asked local people to sign that said, I support making the Sierra National Forest into a national monument. And that was it. That was it. That was my
Yeah.
policy proposal. I didn't know, what my position was going to be on logging or
Yeah. Yeah.
any of that. All those things developed in time. And by the time the actual bill was introduced, for every line, I had almost a year's worth of experience on that particular topic, right?
Yeah.
Um, but if we're talking about the areas where there was flexibility, hunters and hunting are not a problem in the area. So to me, it was an open-ended, if the congresswoman wanted to have hunting or not hunting, that was up to her,
Hmm.
really.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
in the end, she was not interested in having that be there. So there's no clause in there regarding hunting. But again, that's an example of, we could go either way. And if we
Yeah.
had a bunch of advocates from, Ducks Unlimited, which is an, a advocacy group for people who shoot ducks, essentially, um, we would have had a clause in there, right? So
Yeah.
it just, all these
Well,
things, and if you
yeah,
could
it's
make a
it's
national
tough.
park without having to go through the federal government, That sounds
Well,
great.
it doesn't, I mean, and maybe maybe it's not a perfect analogy or perfect explanation of what your bill is. I think you do have to go through the federal government, but I think,
Yes.
I mean, I don't think that is the fact, but I think, the point is more about, are you, I don't know, I can start to get real esoteric with this, but the point is that I think everything is a negotiation. And when you walk into an office, you're in a negotiation, even if it's your very first meeting. And what you're what you're negotiating at that first meeting is, that what impression you're going to leave. And I think the flexibility is the inflexibility is a real, it's a killer. But that flexibility is hard to have because what it requires you to have done is to walk in there, I think, and maybe it doesn't require this, but for me personally, this when I am in a situation like this, I have to walk in sort of knowing what I am unwilling to give up and what I'm willing to give up, so that I have a sort of a foundation of comfort, and I know like where the boundaries are,
Yeah.
and then I can come off as being less desperate when someone challenges me,
Yeah.
because the desperation is about it and insecurity and knowing if I'm giving up something that's like devastating to my efforts and not really having thought through all the angles. And it's easier to say that sitting here. It's hard to do that homework and even understand that when you're first starting out. But I think it is, that flexibility comes from, or the need for flexibility and the flexible vibe, if you will, I think comes from a security in your own position. The other thing is patience. I think best advocates are willing to fight like hell, but you don't need to fight right in the beginning with the first person you talk to. I think what happens, what people who haven't been on the victory side of a successful campaign have maybe not experienced, is that there is this moment, and you can kind of feel it when it happens, when you've sort of vetted all the positions and all the holes, and like the coalition and the supporters and the advocates, they're locked in. We agree, like this is what we're doing. We've turned over every stone. Like we know what we want and how to get it, and we know who the opposition is, and we know what they're opposed to and why they're opposed to it, and we've come to a place where we agree to disagree. And now we're just in the fight, and we're getting toward the end of session, and like that's when the fight matters. That's when the willingness to just do whatever and just walk the halls and talk to whoever will listen, and just like you're just like real time counting votes, and like all the just like you're tamping down objections and rumors, and like you're just in that. Like the best advocates know when to turn that on and when to turn that off, and that that's a hard thing to know, especially because I think a lot of what attracts people to advocacy is the fight. It is the emotion and the adrenaline of it, and that's that's a hard thing when you come up against the institutionalists and the bureaucrats who are like, yeah, this is a bad thing, but there's other things that are also equally bad and important and need to be solved.
I think that's great advice. That because as you're going through this whole process, right? The bureaucracy tends to resist change, and it seems that you actually have to be calm and measured. You have to have that part of you that's the flexibility, but then there's the moment to dig in, and that usually comes towards the end. And I think that's the hardest part, right? Because right then you're going to be potentially tired. you know you you're the
It
one
comes
that
at the
was
worst possible time
right. You're the
when you've
one that
got
just
nothing
did all
left.
the right. And now you're in the arena now, and it's time to swing your
Yeah,
sword. So
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
I think that's great advice, because an advocate needs to pace themselves like they're in this marathon and pretend that the last 2 miles are going to be a sprint,
that's right.
basically.
That's
Because,
right.
and I think, for myself, I think I was just sprinting the whole time in my campaign. And so I didn't really pace myself appropriately. But I didn't understand the timeline, right? So I
Yeah,
was thinking
yeah.
it was a 2 mile race, and so that was the pace I was going for 12 years.
You got to 2 miles,
So,
and they're like, "Yeah, the starting line is still up there a few more miles."
oh yeah, I mean, I worked for the first 3 years. Really, I worked all the time because we had Obama. I know
Yeah,
it's gonna hang us up in a second here, but we had Obama, and I thought maybe I could make this happen. And I have 3 years, and so literally my pace was just I was just running all the time like that. And then when we didn't get Obama and we got Trump, then I just basically for 6 months, I was just tired, just because the effort, it wasn't because I was depressed. It wasn't like that. It was just because, I had been
yeah.
sprinting for 3 years and then clearly, nothing was going to happen for at least four.